about 15 to 17 million new cars are sold in the United States every single year. And as we transition to electric, that means there is a battery pack required for every one of those vehicles when it becomes fully electric. That is a huge undertaking.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for the Drive Electric Alabama podcast, where we plug you in to everything you need to know about EVs in the state of Alabama. Electric vehicles, or EVs, are helping Alabamians go the distance. EVs are more powerful, more practical, and more cost-effective than you think. EVs are also driving our state's economic growth. In these episodes, we're talking to some of the brightest leaders in the industry about everything from infrastructure, that's charging stations, advancements, to benefits and incentives for people like you. This podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's You're in Charge EV incentive programs. To learn more about these programs, go to alabamapower.com/EV. I'm your host, Cedric Daniels. And EVs have been a big part of my work and personal life for decades. I'm the former Chief Strategy Officer for a Birmingham-based company called Streamline, involved with program management and consultation for clean transportation. Before that, I worked as the Electric Vehicle Marketing Manager at Alabama Power Company. Today, our topic is electric vehicle batteries. We're going to be exploring the cutting-edge technologies, innovations, and challenges around them. And to explain everything is our guest, Mike Oakridge. He is the Executive Director of Alabama Mobility and Power Center, also known as AMP. Welcome to the podcast, Mike. Hey, we're so excited with all of your background and intelligence about this space that you're here with us today. So, Mike, can you let us know a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much for having me here today. My expertise really comes from my background. So I spent over 30 years with Honda Motor Company here in the United States and overseas in several different locations. And through that experience, I gained a lot of knowledge about the auto industry. And when I retired in 2021, we were at the cusp of probably the largest change in the transportation industry that the industry has seen in the last 100 years, where we're seeing connected, automated, shared, and electrified all coming into play at the same time. So when I was offered this position, even though I was retired, I couldn't turn it down because the AMP Center really provides a canvas for us to really focus on what's required to allow Alabama to get the most value out of this change and really transform our economy and our work availability around EVs.
Wow. Thanks, Mike. And don't be modest, because your background is critical and it's an important element of what makes Alabama successful. Now, you're seasoned in the automotive space for sure, as you've noted. But tell us about AMP and what you all do there.
Sure. So AMP stands for the Alabama Mobility and Power Center, and it's named that on purpose because it's about mobility and the power that is required to charge these vehicles. Electric vehicles right now represent about 6% of all new sales in the United States. And so the Alabama Mobility and Power Center was really stood up by Alabama Power, Mercedes-Benz, and the University of Alabama itself. And its main goal is to do use-inspired research. And if I could put big blinking letters around the word use there, which means what do we need? What does the industry need? What do consumers need to be able to be comfortable in changing from an internal combustion engine or an ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle? And I think the biggest part of that is really doing the research that they're asking us to do. So, for example, is there going to be charger availability? Is my battery going to last as long as I want to? What's going to happen with my old gas station? Am I going to wait till I have a charger at my gas station before I buy an electric car? All these kinds of questions are very valid questions, but also lead us to allowing us to do a lot of research. And by driving economic development, we then also show prosperity for the state. So if we do research around a topic, whether that be battery research or power distribution research, we find an innovative solution, we have the ability to spin that out as a new company and give us economic development opportunities. But also, those economic development opportunities drive workforce needs. So a lot of people maybe don't understand the breadth of what we're talking about, but the best estimates that we can come up with right now is in the next 10 years, there will be $600 billion of economic development or CapEx flowing into this industry. 600 billion with a B. It's hard even to comprehend. Right now, Alabama makes up about 8% of all of the automotive market in the United States. So if we just use that number, that means Alabama should see somewhere around 30 to $50 billion of economic growth in the next 10 years if we play our cards right.
So did I hear you right? $600 billion with a B.
With a B.
That is a lot.
Yes, it's a lot. It's unfathomable at some point, but when you think about the amount of cars that are built in the United States every year and the amount of cars that are consumed, about 15 to 17 million new cars are sold in the United States every single year. And as we transition to electric, that means there is a battery pack required for every one of those vehicles when it becomes fully electric. That is a huge undertaking.
So audience, EV battery research, as you've already heard from Mike, is a dynamic and it's a rapidly evolving field because of its technology behind it, especially the batteries that are powering the electric cars and trucks and buses and other things as well. Now, these vehicles wouldn't run without their batteries. So, Mike, can you give us some insights into the research, a little deeper dive that's currently going on and what's on the horizon when I think about people asking questions about charging speed, safety, battery chemistry, the environmental impact, and regulations as well as recycling. So some of those types of aspects, can you give us a little depth about how you would describe those developments, please?
Here at the AMP Center, we have two primary areas of research. One of them has to do with power and power infrastructure. So if you think the battery already exists, now how do I get power to that battery or power from that battery? And that's going to occur at the SCIB building here on campus. The second part of the research is really on the battery technology, battery chemistry, which we call LabCR, which is the Laboratory for Advanced Batteries component research. And we're in a funding cycle for this right now, but once in place, we'll have a cutting edge world-class lab being able to do very high-tech battery research around battery materials, battery manufacturing capabilities, but also unique to the lab that we're speccing out will be the ability to characterize those batteries under charging and discharging conditions. In other words, look inside the battery down to one atom, up to a few microns, so 1/1000th of a piece of hair, and actually see what's happening in the batteries as it's charging and discharging, allowing us to make innovations to make them more effective for consumer use. I think everybody knows the problems with electric battery storage systems is like your laptop. You buy a laptop, it lasts for 8 hours, and 2 years later, it lasts for 15 minutes. Of course, the battery management systems and the battery technology itself is evolving very, very, very quickly. So how do we keep abreast of this and how do we keep in front of this? Not only for the innovation, but by doing that type of research, we're going to gain knowledge which will inform us of skills that are required for this industry to survive and thrive. So really, the research has two outputs. It is innovation and it is gaining knowledge and building curriculum so that we can inform a workforce and therefore we become the primary source for knowledge-based learning around batteries. So there's a couple grants we've already got around this. We've just finalized a second use battery grant, which is taking the used batteries out of EVs and using them for something else. They'll still have about 80% of their life left. And this could be things like behind the grid storage. In other words, how do we store energy and then provide energy at peak times? So store energy during off-peak hours and provide energy during high peak hours. Also, we're doing research around complete DC systems, which means I get this question all the time. What happens when Florida gets hit with a hurricane and I can't charge my car? The idea is create portable charging systems that use DC off-grid solutions that can be deployable into these areas of disaster. The other really exciting thing we're doing here is because this is a university, we have, of course, a lot of students. So we're very fortunate to be one of 12 universities in North America selected to be part of the Battery Workforce Challenge, which is utilizing student groups to build the batteries, build the battery packs, build the battery management systems, and install those into a vehicle, and then do competitions against the other 11 universities that were also in this Battery Workforce Challenge. This will allow students to get hands-on knowledge about how a battery functions in a vehicle, but also how it interfaces with chargers and other systems within the vehicle.
Well, you covered a lot of ground there, Mike, and thank you for leading this effort in the AMP Center, because this is so important to the industry, and your intelligence and awareness of all the aspects of what's necessary and important for this research are going to be vital to make us successful. Now, you talked about battery management, and if you will, can you describe the kinds of circumstances that an owner of an EV might have in those challenges with trying to have their battery charged to make long trips or whatever they have to do on a daily or weekly basis, and then how you are involved with that type of examination and research to help that individual, someone that has an electric vehicle of their own?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with kind of what a battery management system is. The best way I can describe it is if you had a whole bunch of batteries, you still need some way to control how the power gets to those batteries, how quickly the power gets to those batteries, and to mitigate things like overheating or any other safety problems. The battery management system is really power electronics and software that controls how the battery is charged and discharged. Probably the most recent thing people have heard is long lineups in cold weather for charging your car. The battery management system, if used correctly, can help mitigate that, which in other words, if you plug in that you're going to a supercharger in your car, the battery management system will warm your batteries to a certain temperature, which will allow maximum charging efficiency when you actually get to the charger. So it's doing things like that. But the research that we really want to do really is part of the legacy of how we got here, which is really internal combustion engines. So if you think about an internal combustion engine, it really hasn't changed significantly at the core since it was invented. There's a piston that goes up and down, there's a spark, and there's gas. But if you think about your car today, there's turbochargers, there's idle management systems, there's cylinder management systems, there's superchargers, there's direct injection engines. There's all of these. I mean, even going back to the 70s, probably when we changed from points and condensers to electronic ignition, all of these things are kind of bolt-ons around the engine, and they made the engine more efficient. We're not there yet on EVs. We basically have a battery in a car and a battery management system. But every type of battery chemistry has pros and cons. So, NMC or batteries that use cobalt have a very high and very fast discharge rate. Other batteries such as LFP or other ones have different characteristics. So the battery management system in the future could be used to control different types of batteries within one battery pack, depending on what the customer asks for through their input through the throttle, to basically change how the car reacts. So there's a huge value in that. And that right now, the battery management systems in the United States is about a $4 billion industry. And Bloomberg recently came out and explained that they believe that industry is going to be a $39 billion industry by 2030. So huge amounts of change, huge amounts of economic development opportunities. And with those economic development opportunities come job opportunities for the state of Alabama.
As we talk about infrastructure, that's charging stations for our residential customers, let's take this opportunity to remind you that Drive Electric Alabama podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's Home Charging Rebate Program. You can get $500 when you purchase and install a level 2 charger at your home. If you want to know more, check the show notes or go to alabamapower.com/EV. Now, back to the facts. So, audience complexity when it comes to battery management systems. At the same time, you can feel confident that Mike and the Alabama Mobility and Power Center is going to be working toward making it work efficiently for us, so we can just get in and travel where we have to go in our EVs. So let's switch gears a bit here, Mike. The domestic battery industry for EVs has witnessed a remarkable transformation, reflecting the nation's commitment to sustainable and clean transportation solutions. As the demand for EVs continues to surge, the focus on advancing battery technology has become pivotal. Now, Mike, can you tell us about AMP Center and what it's doing when it comes to domestic battery research as a hub?
Sure. I think I'll speak more a little bit about, we call it LabCR, the Laboratory for Advanced Battery and Component Research. And this lab will allow us to bring in either recycled or raw materials and then process them in such a way so that they can become the components that make a battery. So for example, if I bring in lithium or I bring in graphite, I can process those into anode, cathode, separator, and electrolyte, the four main components of a battery. I can then build those out into an actual battery cell. We'll be able to build two different kinds of cells. It'll be an 18250 cell, which is, if you can imagine, there's AAA batteries and AA batteries. An 18250 cell would be what you would think of if there was such a thing as an A battery. It's about that size. The other one is a pouch cell, which looks like a pouch, and it is the two main structures that are used in EVs today. These batteries, we'll be able to build about 500 of these batteries a day in this lab. But the really cool part is what I mentioned earlier, where we're able to characterize these batteries under load condition, under charging and discharging, but also under irregular conditions. So for example, one of the tests we spec is a nail penetration test, which sounds pretty crazy, but can you imagine a battery being charged and discharged and we shoot a nail through it as it's being charged and discharged? Why would anybody want to do that? To understand what the mechanisms for it catching on fire are, we can then mitigate those circumstances and make the battery pack safer. We also will be able to see, like I said, down to one atom. So we'll be able to understand exactly what battery technologies need to change to mitigate some of the concerns that consumers have today, such as battery degradation, or as we already talked about, battery charging and discharging in cold weather situations. So we'll be able to, for the first time, really understand the entirety of the battery system and then make changes to that. So the idea is the lab itself is based off of scientific principles, but the way the lab is designed is basically based off business principles, which means let's make a plan. Let's build a battery with this chemical composition exactly. We build a set of batteries, we characterize those, and we say, hey, I thought it was going to do this, but it didn't. It did something slightly different. But if we were to, change the way that we deposit the graphite on the copper or whatever it is, and then we build another batch of batteries and do it all over again, basically iterative research that will allow us to make huge improvements in battery technology, but also gain the knowledge to build workforce development programs, which I believe are critical to making this industry sustainable in the United States.
So thanks, Mike, for that great information. When you talk about batteries and the domestic battery research, how many changes have taken place when it comes to the updates since the Biden-Harris administration announced a $3.5 billion fund to strengthen the domestic battery manufacturers? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that's one of many programs that are out there. But that $3.5 billion fund is really broken up into, I believe, 41 projects that can apply for up to $300 million per projects. We already have several companies that are participating in the battery industry in the United States, in Alabama. Probably the one that shocked me the most when I really got into this type of work is Alabama Graphite down in Coosa County. So I was unaware that Alabama had 50 active graphite mines pre-World War II. People hear about lithium ion batteries. And they go, oh, graphite's just a little piece of that. There's about 50 times more graphite than there is lithium in a battery. So there's a huge need for graphite. And Alabama, we believe, has the largest domestic supply of graphite in the United States. There's a big deposit in Alaska as well, but that's kind of a little bit more unknown. Also, there's another company that recently started up that is extracting lithium from brine that comes from the Smackover Basin, which comes into the top of Alabama, kind of goes across into Arkansas. So there's a lot of other projects in the work as well. I think everybody's eyes light up when they hear announcements like, I think Mississippi just announced $1.9 billion battery factory in North Mississippi. But what they don't understand is the supply chain that's required to support that type of plant is 10, 15 times the size of that one announcement. And it's where Alabama can really thrive because those types of projects are really suited towards what I'll call small towns. So, like 50 to 100 acre sites, 200 to 300 people working in a factory. I just described most of rural Alabama. So I think we have the opportunity to really pick and choose which economic development opportunities we go after and which are best fits, not only to support the industry that's growing in Alabama, but in the southeastern region, and really make some changes in people's lives, especially in rural Alabama.
Thanks, Mike. That sounds like jobs in Alabama. Great news. It's now time for a segment where we separate fact from fiction when it comes to EVs. This is brought to you by the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition. There's a myth out there that says EVs are not as safe as gasoline vehicles. But the truth is, EVs are safer, period. The National Fire Protection Association did a study in 2020, and they found that per 100,000 vehicles sold in the U.S., over 1,500 gas-powered vehicles caught fire. Guess how many EVs caught fire in that same equation? Only about 25. One of the reasons they're less likely to catch fire than internal combustion engine vehicles is because EVs are designed with additional safety features. They will cool the battery and shut down the electrical system if they detect a collision, overheating, or short circuiting. All right, let's go back to the conversation. Now, to wrap things up a little bit, let's give us, Mike, some key takeaways that we need to remember about EV batteries. You've talked about some fabulous information, and can you share with us, though, the key takeaways?
Sure. I think there's still a lot of skepticism about whether or not EVs are here to stay. And I think a lot of that comes with anxiety about changing from an ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle. And I completely understand them. When I did it, I also had some anxiety as soon as I switched over to electric vehicle. But I'll tell you, it goes away almost as quickly as it comes because you find out there are a lot of charging networks. There are a lot of benefits. And the fact, I always use this to my friends who don't drive electric cars. Of course, I charge in my garage most of the time. So I come home from work, I plug my car in, and I walk in my house. And when I wake up in the morning, my car is 100% charged. So people say, how long does it take to charge my car at home? I say about 2 seconds because I plug it in and walk away. I don't really care how long it takes. But I think what people don't understand who are still driving ICE vehicles is if you had a gas pump in your garage or at your place of residence and you filled up your car at home every single day, how often would you go to the gas station? And the answer is almost never. And that's the big convenience that electric cars bring, is that you basically always have a fully charged car when you wake up in the morning. The big takeaways is don't necessarily be hung up that the infrastructure is not there yet, because for the most part, you're going to be charging and discharging, within the range of your house. Now, when you go on long trips, sure. I think the other part is that electrification isn't coming by itself. Electrification is coming with connected, automated, and shared. So what I mean by connected automated, basically cars can talk to each other, cars can talk to light fixtures, cars can talk to the signals on the roads. Also, from an autonomous point of view, people think we're a long way away from that as well. And honestly, there is autonomous cabs running around all kinds of parts of this country today with no drivers whatsoever. The reason I bring this up is the autonomous really lends itself to electrification, because if I drove or my car drove me to work and then it left and got charged while I'm working and came back, it was fully charged. Really, all my anxieties start going away around whether or not there's going to be an infrastructure. So I think we're like I said at the beginning of this interview, we're in the largest amount of change that the transportation industry has ever seen, probably in the last 100 years. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And electrification is the first thing that's coming. Will it come with some pain? Absolutely. It's not going to be a seamless transition. And will it happen all at once? No. There's 250 million cars on the road today in the United States. There's about 16 million that are sold every single year. So even if all 16 million sold were all EVs, it would still take 10, 15 years to be able to switch over everything to electric. We're going to see gas and electric vehicles on the road for a long, long, long time. The big question for consumers is, which one makes more sense for me? And as the problems are mitigated, I believe EVs will be the obvious choice for most people.
A tremendous thanks, Mike. It feels good that in Alabama, they can be assured that you and the Alabama Mobility and Power Center, commonly called AMP, is there spearheading all of the complexities that you're talking about to advance this to the benefit of Alabama, its economic development, its citizens and owners of electric vehicles.
Thanks very much for having me. Really enjoyed speaking with you today and looking forward to speaking again.
In our upcoming episode, we'll delve into the economic influence of electric vehicles in Alabama. We'll be talking about how EVs contribute to enhancing fuel efficiency and how they reduce fuel expenses and emissions, among other economic effects. Join us as we uncover the current impact of electric vehicles on Alabama's economy and discuss what the future holds for this dynamic landscape. Our three guests will be Ellen McNair, who is the Secretary of Alabama Department of Commerce, also Greg Canfield, the former Commerce Secretary, and currently at the Burr and Foreman law firm in Birmingham. And last but not least, Blair King, Director of Business Development at Alabama Power. Thanks so much for listening. The Drive Electric Alabama podcast is brought to you by Alabama Power's You're in Charge EV programs, as well as the Alabama Clean Fuels Coalition. The series is co-hosted by me, Cedric Daniels, and Michael Staley. And the podcast is produced by Ingredient. For more information, you can always check the show notes or go to alabamapower.com/EV. Thanks for listening.